Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. We're going to be this morning in the book of Ecclesiastes. And when I say we're going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes, we're going to be all over the place. Now, you are more than welcome to grab a Bible from the seats in front of you. If you have your phone and have a Bible app, you can actually use the little QR code thing in there. It'll say Bible on the link tree. That'll take you right to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. That's where we're going to begin today. So I'm going to ask a question. If you had a superpower, what would it be? I just spent 8 days, actually a little bit longer than that, but Tara and I had 8 days uninterrupted with 4 very active grandkids, one of which is 17 months old. If he had a superpower, he is Dash from The Incredibles. Like, you turn your head and he is gone, and he is into absolutely everything. The other one is he gets to be Godzilla when his 3-year-old sister is playing at her dollhouse, where he goes in and he just demolishes everything and she cries. But anyway, that would be his superpower. Mine, I leave my debit card at restaurants. So you could talk to my wife about this. It is, I'm not going to say more times than not, but I cannot tell you how many times we go to a restaurant, I pay with a debit card, and we get to the gas station, we get to the mall, we get to Target, whatever it might be. I go to pay, I look at my wallet, and I turn to her and I say, we need to go back to the restaurant. And her usually is like, really, again? You're doing this again? And so last time I went to it was actually, I can't remember where it was. We went to the restaurant, went back. I said, hey, I left my debit card here. Manager goes to the back, looks for debit card. He's walking out. I've got my driver's license, which, by the way, they will always ask for your driver's license to make sure it matches up with the debit card. I already had it out, and he said, you done this before? I'm like, you have no earthly idea how much I have done this. But so I wouldn't necessarily call that a superpower or anything like that, but that's my thing. There was actually a guy in the Bible that, if there was a guy in the Bible that had a superpower, it might be that guy right there. His name was Solomon. Solomon was about ready to become king, and he had a big task. He was going to build the temple, do a lot of those different things, and God came to him, Solomon's son of David, and he says, listen, ask for whatever and I'm going to give it to you. Now, interestingly, he didn't ask to leap tall buildings in a single bound or anything like that. He asked for wisdom. And quite honestly, if you're going to lead a nation, wisdom is a pretty good thing to ask for. And so God says, well, since you asked for wisdom, I'm going to double it. And so Solomon was incredibly wise, maybe superhuman wise, in the way that he was able to see life, and he became very wealthy. He became very powerful. The nation of Israel expanded under him. People would come from all around the known world just to listen to his wisdom. But not all was perfect. You see, Solomon, even though he was incredibly wise, he veered off course. One of the things that we find that Solomon married way too many women and had way too many women on the side. And he started to dabble in false religions, and what could have been this incredible life ended in a place where Solomon is at the end of his life, and he's questioning existence. He's questioning life. He's really kind of at a place like, I don't get the meaning of all of this. Kinda, if you were to read this and you're a psychologist, you might say the dude was depressed. He was having not like a midlife crisis, an end-of-life crisis. He was having a faith crisis. But yet, he is able to work through the junk and get to a really good place. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to work through the junk and get to a really good place. We're going to journey through kind of what Solomon was dealing with in his mind. Actually, just think about what Solomon is struggling with. We're going to start really at the beginning of the book of Ecclesiastes, and in chapter 1, verse 2, he basically begins with everything is meaningless. And says the teacher, completely meaningless. So here's the wisest guy who's ever walked the face of the earth, apart from Jesus, and this is what he's saying. In verse 14, he says, I observed everything going on under the sun, and really it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. And chasing the wind is something that is a common refrain of Solomon in the book. In verse 17, he says, so I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness to folly. But I learned firsthand that pursuing all is like chasing after the wind. And finally, he gets into chapter 2 in verse 17. He says, so I came to hate life. I think about that statement right there. So I came to hate life because everything done here under the sun is so troubling. Everything is meaningless, like chasing the wind. So the question is, why was he so frustrated? Why was he so down on life? Why was he so depressed? I mean, he had the wealth of Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, and he had everything that the world says is it, yet he said it is all meaningless. It's, in fact, this word meaningless, if you're using the ESV version, it would say vanity, and I don't necessarily like that particular way of saying it, but it really means that life is empty, and life is perplexing, and life is frustrating. You ever feel that? Ever feel that life just kind of is what's the point? And that's where Solomon is. And I think he's there because he's examined a lot of the realities of life. So we're going to look at a couple of those realities here today. And again, we're going to kind of hop around a little bit throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to start with chapter 4, verse 1. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors was power, and there was no one to comfort them. So he's looking at that there's people in this world that are just simply oppressed. We can talk about racism. We can talk about socioeconomic injustice. He was looking at all these different things and saying, people are oppressed. And he's like, it just doesn't settle with me. It's like it's something wrong with this. But it's not just oppression. Notice what is said in chapter 9, verses 15 and 16. But there was found in it a poor, wise man, and he, by his wisdom, delivered the city, yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. So he's looking at not just oppression, he's looking at poverty. And, you know, we think about poverty. Jesus said we will always have the poor among us. But he's looking at the fact that there's impoverished people all around, and they just don't seem to get the help that they need. And then he goes on and looks at evil, chapter 8, verse 11. Because the sentence against the evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is set to do evil. When evil goes unpunished, it opens the door for more evil to be done. We might be able to look at our world today and say that, again, when evil goes unpunished, this is what is going to happen. It kind of, men throw caution to the wind and says, hey, if they get away with it, I'm getting away with it. And evil just runs rampant. And then there's this, verse 14. There is vanity that takes place on earth, that the righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity. This is also meaningless. So basically what he is saying is righteous people are treated as wicked people, and wicked people are treated as righteous people. Again, we could probably look at our culture and society and go, yup. Kind of seems like that's what's happening in many places today. And then chapter 10, verses 5 and 6, there is another evil that I have seen under the sun. Kings and rulers make a grave mistake when they give great authority to foolish people and low positions to people of proven worth. Fools are put in a position of leadership. We can just leave that one right there. And as I say this, I'm in a position of leadership, and I am sure that there have been plenty of people through the years who have said, Shaffer's an idiot. Okay? So, but again, he's looking at this, and he's looking at all the poverty and oppression and wicked and evil and the fact that idiots lead us and so on. And so one of the things that he is saying is life isn't fair. Life's not fair. Have you ever feel that? Somebody else gets a promotion. So, somebody else gets the life that you feel like you deserve. Or maybe it's a medical diagnosis that you're thinking, why is this being visited upon me? And here's the reality. Life is not fair. This last week, again, Tara and I went up to Dodge City, Kansas. We took care of our grandkids for a while Mom and Dad went to California. They went to a conference and went to Disney and all that kind of stuff. We have a 3-year-old granddaughter who is her daddy. She's a clone of her daddy in so many ways. And one of the ways that she is like her dad is she hates to sleep. So when Zach, who was our son, was probably 2 or 3 years old, he would poke himself in the eyes, like do that thing, so as not to go to sleep. He hated sleep that much. Avery, like her daddy, hates sleep. And so we would put her in her bed, and as we put her in bed, she wouldn't get out of bed, but she would object strongly with this phrase over and over, it's not fair. It's not fair that the adults get to stay up and I have to go to bed. And I am not a compassionate person, so I am thinking in my mind, get used to it, sweet cheeks. Life ain't fair. Right? Because the reality is it's not. And Solomon's looking at life and it's like he's questioning very existence because life isn't fair. But it's not just that life's not fair. Let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. And he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. So there's a really kind of beautiful thing here, the eternity, and God has placed eternity in our hearts. But even with that, there's just certain things about God we can't explain. There's certain things, there's certain things about God that you will probably come to a pastor with a question like, why would God do? And I've had to learn through the years, I don't have to defend God. I don't have to explain God. In fact, one of the things that makes God God is there's certain things that we can't explain. But Solomon was struggling with this. And chapter 9, verse 12, he says, for man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. I can guarantee you, every single one of us at some point in time have gotten a call that we didn't expect. Every one of us has had a conversation with somebody that stopped us in our tracks. Just this week, I was up, like I said, in Kansas and went into Wendy's with our 2 youngest grandkids. And I ran into my high school basketball coach. How cool was that? I hadn't seen him in like over 30 years. And we were talking, and they were on a way to a funeral. They were on, actually, where my son ministers in Dodge City, they were on the way to the funeral there. Their nephew, 44 years old. Found a spot. 6 months later, he's gone. Have you ever been in one of those situations where you see somebody who has, like, they've saved all their life for retirement, and as soon as retirement happens, they are taken? It goes on to say this in chapter 2, verse 16, for of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance. seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. Now, I don't know when Jesus is coming back. Please don't ask me. My answer is, I don't know. But if it's another 200 years, all of us will be dead. And the truth of the matter is, no one will remember us. We might be a name in a family tree that somebody talks about, but there will be no remembrance of us. And then again, there's chapter 5, verse 15. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil, that he may carry away in his hand. Ever heard the statement, you can't take it with you? Solomon said it first. And so he looks at all of this, and he kind of basically says, listen, life is an exercise in futility. It just seems like we can work, and we can work, and we work, and it ends in nothing. And so he's kind of looking at life like life is not fair, and it's an exercise in futility. And then there's this. Chapter 7, verse 14, enjoy prosperity while you can, but when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. Remember that there is nothing, that nothing is certain in this life. I would underline that in my Bible. I'd highlight that in my Bible. There's nothing that is certain in this life. That's, listen, probably one of the hardest things for me to explain to people is that there's certain things that I can't explain, and the fact that life is there's nothing certain in life is one of those that perplexes us all. Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? We struggle with things like that. But then again, in verse 18 of chapter 9, better to have wisdom than the weapons of war, but one sinner can destroy much that is good. In other words, a multitude of wisdom can be destroyed in one sinful act. That's a reality of life. In chapter 11, verse 2, Solomon says, but divide your investments among many places, or you do not know what risk might lie ahead. Ever sat with a financial advisor? What does a financial advisor say? Diversify. Why? Because there's no sure investment. Solomon knew this thousands of years ago. That nothing is certain. In fact, what he kind of comes into is what frustrates him with life, is that life is uncertain. You ever feel that? Hear the sirens? That's probably a reality, that life is uncertain for somebody right now. One person said it like this, and I really appreciate this. Solomon is kind of saying that life is like a jigsaw puzzle with a bunch of pieces missing. And because those pieces are missing, it's just incomplete, and we can't wrap our minds around it. Now, we're in a series right now where we're talking about a biblical worldview, and one of the issues that we really need to grapple with is, what is my purpose? Really, how should I live? And up to this point in time, you've probably been thinking, well, Brandon, all you have brought today is a bunch of questions and a bunch of negativity. But I'm going somewhere. And I'm going somewhere because Solomon was going somewhere. He was wrestling with all of the things about life, but there are really two items that kind of float to the top. And these two items, as they float to the top, it's kind of like, yeah, but life is this. It's not all of this stuff. All of this stuff is depressing and it's bad, and I can't wrap our minds around it, but we can wrap our minds around these two items. So I want to talk about those very quickly. But as we do, I'm going to tell you that the first time, I was, probably 21, 22 years old, I was in graduate school, and I heard a professor say, this is a purpose of life that Solomon talks about in the book of Ecclesiastes, and intellectually in my mind, I am saying, that's not the case. Because listen to this. Listen to chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. I have perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. And also everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. Now I want you to think about this here for a moment. We're talking about toil and labor, talking about job, pleasure, and God's gift to them. We don't necessarily think this all the time, but the occupation that God has given us in life should bring enjoyment, should bring satisfaction. And at the end of the day, you can say, I worked today, and I earned money today, and I supported my family. There should be enjoyment and satisfaction in that. Actually, later this year, we're going to be doing a series. We're calling this Everyday Theology, and we're going to talk about the rhythms of life, but in the rhythms of life is job. And how that we can find fulfillment in the careers and jobs that we have, but also that we can use that as a mission field that God has placed us in. But he's not done talking about this. This is a very common theme. In verse 15 of chapter 8, and I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through all the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. Again, talking about joy and life and ultimately the toil that we go through. And again in chapter 9, verse 9, live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life that God has given you under the sun. The wife God gives you is your reward for all your earthly toil. Now, some of you are probably saying, wait a minute. My marriage is a battlefield. But I'm going to say this. It doesn't have to be. I'll even go as far as to say when it's good, it's good. And I'll even go as far as to say when it's good, it's great. And there is joy that comes in marriage. There comes that fellowship. And God's saying it's not good for man to be alone. And listen, we want to help you in your marriage, so I'm going to make a shameless plug right now. The 26th, 3 weeks from today, we're going to be starting a class. It's a video class led by a family in the church called Love and Respect. It's about marriage, 6:30 Sunday nights, child care provided. You can actually use that little link tree, the QR code, and sign up right now while I'm preaching. So if you'd like to do that and so on, in fact, I can tell you, my daughter's about ready to get married, and I'm telling her about this class because I know it's valuable. And again, we need to put hard work into our marriage. But there's a theme, there's a thread that kind of runs through here, and it's the idea of enjoying life. I'll never forget when I was sitting in class in Abilene Christian University. Dr. Thompson was always looking like this through his glasses. If I had hair, I could show you how his hair was always over his eyes and so on. But I remember Dr. Thompson talking about this in class, that most of us were raised with the idea that God is the great cosmic killjoy, that He's put a bunch of rules and regulations and commands into our lives to punish us, and He just wants to take all the fun out of life. But the reality is He's given us His Word. He's given us His commands. He's given us guardrails and parameters by which to live. And when He's given us those, that actually brings fulfillment and joy into our lives. And so I know for me, it was a struggle to reach that point to say life is to be enjoyed. That God has given us life as a gift. I don't know that maybe when we stand before Him up in heaven, He's going to ask us, what did you do with the life that I gave you? And so when you look at Solomon, you got Solomon who went way beyond the parameters, way beyond the guardrails, right? And so his life was one of absolute hedonism. So I don't think that's what he's talking about when he's talking about enjoying life. I think he's saying live within the parameters. Live within those guardrails that God has given. Live a God-centered life. And from that, It will impact your marriage. It will impact your job. It will impact your free time and bring you joy, bring you enjoyment in life. But here's the reality. It's not so much about how we live our life. It's the reality that we live with judgment in mind. We're going to talk about death next week. And I know that death is not a subject that we like to talk about, and judgment is not something that we like to talk about. The fact of the matter is we will all face judgment. And the judgment that Christ's followers face is going to be much different than those who have chosen not to have Jesus as part of their life. But there is an end. And Solomon looks at that end, and he kind of comes up with this idea that, well, maybe there is a point to it. He's talked about enjoying life, but he reaches the end. Reaches the end of the book of Ecclesiastes and just kind of drops it. Chapter 12, verse 13. The end of the matter. All's been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. 6 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, we are told to fear God. When we talk about fear, there's a couple of different kinds of fear that we can talk about. We can talk about that being filled and consumed with, oh, God's going to smite me, sort of fear. And listen, God could do that if he wanted to. But there's another type of fear, and this type of fear is like awe. It's wonder. I remember back in the 90s, and I was in Bible college, we used to sing the song, I stand in awe of you. That there is something about God that should create wonder and should create that awe, but it is also that we seek to revere him or honor him. And it's not just that we honor him, it's also that we depend upon him. We trust that he is God, and we trust that his ways are best. In fact, I love what it talks about when it talks about the fear of God and how that centers our life. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 18, it is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Whoever fears God will avoid all extremes. Can we just say that we live in a world that it just seems like everything's at an extreme? And one extreme that Solomon was dealing with was that idea of giving in. Just giving in, throwing caution to the wind, giving in to all the temptations that are there and going that extreme in life. But then he also went to a place where he was like, I just want to give up. So there's the idea of, give in or give up. And I was actually talking with a friend a while back. In fact, we were in a car and we were actually listening to this kind of music. But we were listening to 80s hair metal. And then, he mentioned that I like 80s hair metal, but I also like the grunge music of the 90s. And there was really some philosophical sort of stuff that went along with that. You see, the philosophy of 80s hair metal was give in. Get whatever you want out of life. Have as much fun as you can. Party as much as you can. You understand. It was just like, it was the age of decadence and opulence. But the grunge metal of the 90s said that didn't work. Life just sucks. That's really what grunge metal of the 90s was about. Life is not worth living. I mean, Nirvana, it is no surprise of why Kurt Cobain committed suicide. Because life was not worth living. Those two extremes are still prevalent in life. But the fear of God centers us to not go either one of those. When you think about that, that kind of leads us to our bottom line, and the bottom line is this. The purpose of life is to enjoy life and honor God. It took me a long time to realize that life could be enjoyed. But I will tell you that that's liberating and freeing. Listen, I love my lumpy recliner where I can watch TV. I enjoy watching basketball games. Yesterday was not as enjoyable because all my teams lost. Like all of them. But there are certain things about life that are good. When God says, keep my commands, I think what he is saying is, I'm going to give you some guardrails. I'm going to give you some parameters by which to live. Live inside these, and you'll find that there's freedom in this. And so we've been doing this thing this year, and we will continue to do this, of kind of talking about how we can own things, but, head, heart, hands. And think about Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 6 and 7. Yes, remember your Creator now while you are young, before the silver cord of life snaps and the golden bowl is broken. Don't wait until the water jar is smashed at the spring and the pulley is broken at the well. For then the dust will return to the earth and the spirit will return to God who gave it. This is a fancy way of saying we're all going to die. And it's better to live with the knowledge that we're all going to die than to ignore that is going to happen. So if Jesus does not come back, we are all going to die. And he basically says, listen, remember that your Creator is also your judge. We're going to be at that place where we are going to face judgment. So that's something that we need to realize. We're going to have to give an account of the life that God has given us. But armed with that, think about verse 12. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. Now, he was talking about the fact that there are so many things like book-wise out there. I'm going to add to that, be careful what you read, listen to, and watch. We live in an age of information. We live in the digital age. We can get on YouTube. We can go to any podcast. We can go down any rabbit trail we want to go down. And pretty much, I can't tell you how many times I have conversations where people are saying, hey, I was reading the other day. I was watching a YouTube video the other day. I was listening to a podcast, and it kind of took them to a place that they should not go in their mind. And here's one of the things that we have to realize is what influences your mind will direct your heart. And what will direct your heart is going to guide your steps. And so this is what Solomon says about this. The end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. The idea here, keep his commandments, is not just we know his word. We immerse ourselves in his word. We know his commandments. We know his statutes. We know his guidance in our life. Because we also have to come to grips with this. What influences your mind and directs your heart must guide your steps. So when the greater influence of everything is God's word, that's going to guide our life. And again, talk about joy, the freedom that comes in knowing Jesus. It's something very powerful in there. So again, what is my purpose? Enjoy life, honor God. Those are two interconnected things. God has given us life. Let's not waste it. Join me in prayer.